Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing? Welcome to our little mini extra critique session. I know not everyone sent in work, and that's fine. This was just an optional critique for anyone who felt like they needed the extra help. If you can hear me okay, just type in the chat box that the sound is good. I'd just like to confirm that before we begin. So does the mic sound okay? Good morning, Kathy. Good morning, Linda. All right. So how's everyone doing this morning? How's your week going with the paintings? I know a lot of you are still playing catch up, which is fine. This morning I just released another video for part of our week 6 and 7. And I'll be uploading another one this afternoon. So the uploads, because I'm uploading in HD, take a while sometimes. So, but the one that's up now, I'm painting the second color pass on the eyes. And then the nose and mouth will be available this afternoon, probably by this evening. And so you guys will have those new ones to watch. Yes, going for coffee. I have my chai latte here. So in the coming week, just while we're waiting for a few more people to join in, let's talk about the coming week. So over the next week, I want everyone to start to continue, if you haven't started already, start your second color pass on the large planes. Again, I'm going to kind of be lenient in terms of like how much you get done, though you might find that this second color pass goes faster than the first color pass. It's a lot of work, that first one, when you're first applying color. The second one, you're just kind of tweaking and adjusting and making minor changes. But concentrate on those large planes first and then move into the features. If you can't get to the features by our next critique, that's okay, just let me know. And because kind of from here forward, we're just adding little bits of detail in several layers. So you can be a little bit off schedule, and that's okay. I don't want anyone to feel like they need to rush through. We still have a couple of weeks left of critiques and more instruction. So I did that second color pass, and then I'm letting that dry, and then we're going to be doing that third color pass, which is going to be it's going to be even less amount of work. It's going to be adding like eyelashes and, little textural details, pumping up highlights, and then we're going to move into detailing hair, background, clothing, and kind of bringing an overall polish to our work. So it's kind of lenient. You guys are going to still get the lessons consistently, but as far as your own pace, just try to keep up, but don't stress out if you can't. I want you guys have developed really nice portraits so far, and I don't want you guys to feel like you have to rush through the rest. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Catherine, since you're here, let's go ahead and start with you. Now it looks like you were able to finish out your entire first color pass. Last time you didn't have the lips and the eyes or the hair and the lower chest blocked in. So you can see what a huge difference that has made, just getting some of these areas here blocked in, getting the other eye and the lips. You had expressed concern about the lips being a little bit too red and asked how you would be able to lighten them. And if you watched my lips video, which will be up tonight, and it's the same with the eyes too, it will be very easy for you to lighten them. So don't worry about that. You'll see exactly how to do that in the video. I add more highlights and a little bit more of the small form detail in my painting in that second one. So you'll see how you can go about doing that. Okay, so I can see that some areas look a little sunk in, but otherwise your overall tonality really looks like the model. So that's good. I think the only thing I'm sensing is that maybe you could, and I can't tell if this is the photo, so tell me if, in your painting in real life, if it looks a little bit more high contrast, but I do feel like you could push a couple of the shadows in these areas a little bit darker in your second pass. And you can do that with a glaze. That's a nice subtle way to add a little bit more depth. You can make kind of like a kind of a neutral brown color. This is kind of purplish, as you can see, but when it gets real dark, it takes on kind of a gray-brown tone. And you can see yours is a little bit warmer here. It has a little more red in it. But if you take some of that and then you don't even have to really thin it with medium, although you can, but once you oil out, you should be able to just apply a very small amount over that area and it'll deepen it. Glazes, they build on each other and, magnify what's underneath because they're transparent. Now, is everyone pretty clear on the difference between a glaze and a scumble? I did talk about it in the videos, but I'll just cover that again real quick. A glaze is a transparent application of a color that makes it darker. So when you want to darken an area, you glaze. Or if you want to like enhance a color, you would glaze. So if I wanted the blue to be more saturated here, I could potentially glaze a blue over it and it would become darker and more saturated. That's just an example. Excuse me. A scumble is a semi-opaque or opaque layer. It can be applied thin. Typically it is like you do a glaze, but it lightens and makes the area more opaque. So an example would be going into the lips and it doesn't have to be just white, it's just opaque. So that could be a combination of opaque colors, like yellow ochre is an opaque color. If you're not sure if your color is opaque or transparent, just look on the back of the tube and it usually says transparent, semi-transparent, opaque, semi-opaque. So it'll give you kind of an idea. But, excuse me, sorry, my throat's a little raspy this morning. But in the case where you have the lips here, I would mix like a cool pink that's lighter than what you have, and then you would want to go over that area. You would oil out, just like you see me do in the video, the areas you want to retouch. And then you would go in, let me zoom out just a little bit so I can see. So usually I start where the lightest point is, and then I start to spread that out. Right, and you can see how that makes a big difference there. Another area where you could soften things up is make a slightly darker pink, but one that's lighter than what you have here, and then you just apply that semi-transparent pass over that and just soften up that corner of her lip. If you wanted to intensify, like she has this really chromatic red just right on this inside, but hers is maybe a little bit cooler than what you have. You have maybe more of an orange. You could take like a little bit of alizarin, just a small amount, and glaze over that area, and it would kind of enhance the color. So that's an example of how you can go about doing that. One thing I noticed is that her lip on this side is actually a little bit cooler than what you have. So you might consider taking some of the shadow color that you have here and utilizing some of that in that shadow on the lip. So it's a little bit more of a gray. And it might feel counterintuitive to do that, but so long as you have these other areas like where it curls down, it gets a little bit more red and saturated, it should read just fine. And it's going to keep that feeling of the warm versus cool. She even has a little bit of that underneath. And she gets more pink here right towards that transition in this area. So I think what could probably help with the lips too is just concentrating on introducing some cooler pinks. So pinks that have maybe a little bit more alizarin in them rather than the cadmium red or burnt sienna. And that's going to help distinguish the lips a little bit from the reds in the skin tones. And because she has such a warm skin tone and you're working with warm and cool light. She does have warm tones in her lips, like I pointed out, a couple of these areas that feel a little more hot, but notice that as they get lighter, they actually cool off just a little bit. And it's fine to do that so long as you have these areas where the color picks up in chroma again. So maybe beef up the chroma in that part of the lip as well. Okay, so looking at the rest here, just a few edges to think about when you move into your second pass. Look at the hair edge here. Okay, this line is a little hard. So what I want you to do is you could either tile a halftone that's between the skin tone and the hair color there, kind of a coolish gray, or sometimes what I like to do is I will take the skin tone and I will start to pull streaks of it back into the hair, kind of in that pattern. And then in the final layer, when I go in and reintroduce the hair, I do the opposite. I pull the hair in streaks this way, and it'll kind of give you that hair texture that we get, that real fine kind of texture where the hair thins and meets the scalp. So I would suggest definitely softening that out a little bit. Just looking on this side here, in this little space, I do feel like her hair and temple could come in. Something like that. You have a bit more space across here. And so I would just bring her hairline in, and don't be afraid to add some contrast where we see some of her hair come down. So maybe bringing that dark shape down like that. That'll help build some separation between the ear and the side of the face. She also does have this reflected light, kind of a cool gray tone. You can start to introduce a little bit of that, but the main thing I want you to watch is make sure it doesn't get too light. Sometimes what can help instead of lightening a reflected light is to glaze a little darker next to it, and then let the color that you have here kind of serve as that reflected light. So that's something to kind of think about when you're moving into that second pass. Now, I didn't touch my shadows in my second pass. I will be going back in, and sometimes I wait unless I feel like my shadows aren't dark enough. I will wait to touch my shadows again until I've had my lights kind of established and developed and more to a finish. Then I'll go back in and introduce reflected lights. And the reason I like to wait is because I'm setting the stage for my values across the light mass. And if I went in early on and made my reflected light really, really pale, then it might throw off my sense of values across the light mass of the face. So I'd rather get this area finished and more established. That way I can make a more accurate judgment for those reflected lights, because it's easy to make them too light, and you always want them to be a little bit darker than your darker mid-tone. Okay, the hair color looks good. I think she has a few more dark cool tones. I can't tell if it's just that your painting kind of is sunk in there, but you might try glazing like more of a neutral brown. You can try mixing ultramarine blue with transparent oxide red if you have it, or you can use ultramarine blue with like the burnt sienna, but have it be more towards the blue, and use that to kind of build in a little bit more dark and contrast, and it'll pick up some of that cooler tonality. I feel like your light colors, that kind of coppery color that you have, is perfect. I would watch having such a straight edge on the hair. So what I would suggest whenever you have bangs is do the same thing that I suggest that you do here. I would at first maybe take some skin tone and carry it up and create some breaks, even adding some light skin tone kind of where you see it peeking through in a few areas. It's going to have a little bit more of a shadowy color rather than being this light color. but it can help. And then you can paint little thin striations of darker hair and lighter hair back over the top. So it's I talked about this in my painting where the hair overlaps the shirt. I went ahead and painted the shirt in a little bit from the hair, and that way when I come to paint the details of the hair, I can pull like thinner strands of hair over the front of the shirt, and it'll lay over the surface a little more convincing and it won't feel like a block. So I would suggest that with the bangs too. Just go in and break up the fringe, not evenly everywhere, just you might like look for where you have this nice clear break here, but maybe kind of add a little bit more, and then also just carrying the skin tone up and creating a softer edge there. And then when that dries, you can do the same in reverse, carry the hair tone down. Okay. I'm just looking at a couple of shapes. I feel like this shape cuts in almost a little too sharp. Maybe it comes in a little far. You can see it should kind of line up here with the side of her hairline temple. So I would bring the dark of the hair out just a little bit. It's going to kind of give more even fullness to the round of her head. So I would definitely bring that out to about there before you have this shape pull out. And I think in your second pass, just pay attention to a couple of edges, like in the muzzle here, that edge in the philtrum is a little sharp. You could push the contrast here just a little bit darker. So let me do that with the paintbrush here. Yeah, so I think you could take maybe something a little darker and just add a subtle tone there. We don't want it to look like a mustache, of course. But I think it should have that secondary plane kind of feel to it. And the same thing goes for underneath the mouth, right through here. I think you could just push that value a little bit more in this corner here and make sure that this edge is very soft. She even has just a tiny bit of light that kind of comes in and breaks up at the top here. It's not real strong. It's not that bright. Let me try a different color. Maybe it's like a deeper kind of peachy tone. Maybe something like that. And it'll help to soften that corner of her mouth and it won't feel so harsh. Because she really does have those soft forms. She doesn't have a real hard line there. I think where you can build the intensity and kind of focus in the portrait now is in the eyes. So really spend time going in and punching those darks in the eyes. You can start to put on her eyeliner. And I always recommend going with like a blue-gray. So I'd like to take ultramarine blue with just a tiny, tiny bit of like a brown in there. You can grab burnt sienna or something just to neutralize it, but then add white to it and make a very cool gray that's quite dark, kind of a charcoal color. And you can go in, now on this side it's probably going to be almost straight black. It'll have some opacity to it, but I think you could go in and really push, you know, those contrasts, especially because she has such a thick eyeliner on. And it's a little more obvious. Don't be afraid to push that value. Don't worry about the eyelashes yet, but that is what I would probably do if I were painting her, is go in with that dark eyeliner. And you can see on the right side, it takes on a little bit of a slightly lighter gray. And you'll probably notice too that sometimes there's like a little highlight in there. So you could, and it's usually over wherever the highlight is on the go just a little lighter. Let's exaggerate that over the highlight on the eye. But sometimes if you actually give it some form and don't just put it as one solid color, it's going to, you know, read like makeup sitting over a form. So yeah, I think if you just continue building the dark and the contrast in the eyes and the intensity there, it's going to help develop the portrait even further. And those are pretty much my suggestions for now. As you revisit in like kind of subsequent layers, just pay attention to edge quality. Like the edge around the jawline here is maybe just a tad sharp. Look for where, now I know it's pretty defined on her, like right in here, she has a very defined edge, but, I would say you could have probably a sharp line here, but maybe around here, start to bring it out of focus a little bit. That way we don't have a hard edge all the way around the form. Look for those lost and found edges, and that's going to help things recede, especially where this meets the background. It's very blurred, so you might end up like re-wetting the background just with a thin scumble of the background color, and then retiling that and just blurring the edge just a little bit more, and then that will help. You have a nice soft edge here, so that's almost the effect you want down in this area. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. Do you have any questions, Kathy? So you can kind of see just some of the subtle differences that I'm suggesting here. Oh, so you had a question about the nostril. It was the left nostril, right? You weren't quite sure how to handle it. Because she doesn't have much, like on the right side we see more of the opening here. But on the left side, it's really just kind of a line that carries up from the shadow. So you don't really need to make it much darker than that shadow color. And if this, like this spot here, you could make it just a tad, maybe a tad darker below it. So like instead of having just this dark hole here, I would carry that tone down just a little bit and let it bleed into the philtrum a little bit, and then maybe I think you'll have to define a little more dark back here behind the nostril. So like I said, when you go in and darken it, some of these areas, you're probably going to want to darken some of these areas too. So maybe make that same shadow color, but make it just a little darker. And then you'll end up, you know, deepening some of your cast shadow shape in some areas. It's not all the way connected. It like picks up a deeper shadow up here and then down in the lower part. And it's even softer kind of in this top half. It kind of just fades. Fades out. You might find yourself having to kind of create a little bit of a half tone to transition that. But you can see that that actually helped to add a little more form to those shadows as well. And also this corner of her eye is not quite so light. You might need to build a little more transition as you push this darker in that corner. Some light carries up into there, but you can see it takes on a little bit more of this cool kind of violet tone in this area. So did that help? Yeah, sometimes, now with the nose, it's always tricky because now we're looking, in my view, I'm looking up at the model and I can see the full form. But when you're looking kind of more eye level with the model, like in your case, you're just going to see, you know, sometimes just little value lines. You just want to make sure they're somewhat soft. I think the way you handled the one on the right is just fine, on the left, just merge it with the shadow. Yeah, that looks great though. All right, do you have any other questions? If so, just let me know and I can address them here. We don't have as many people who submitted, so I'm spending a little more time with everyone today. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on. If you think of something, just let me know, Kathy. All right. So, Angela, are you in here, Angela? You sent me an updated picture of your first color pass, and you said that this one had a little bit more accurate color to your portrait. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what you can focus on in the coming week with your second color pass. So yeah, I think you have a good value structure. The colors look pretty good. I feel like some areas, let me just start with the ink here. I can draw out a couple of areas. So a few areas where I'd like you to concentrate on building more form with midtones is this cheek area. If I zoom in here, you can see she has a little more information happening here. There's a little bit of a break in this form. There's a break in this form. You know, this is kind of a rounded shape. And we do get a highlight down this kind of break in the form here. In fact, she even has just a tiny like triangle highlight there. But I feel like yours feels like one large block. So that will mean you're going to go in with a little bit of more of a mid-tone, maybe something a little darker than what you have. And you're going to break up some of these shapes a little bit. By just introducing a little bit more mid-tone and maybe somewhat more of a transition to this pink in the cheek there. Same thing with the lower half of the face. You can see that the value in this area versus the value on the tip of the chin are two different colors. And so it is lighter than this section, but I think you need to work on maybe adding a couple more subtle midtones under the lip and break up that form from the chin. If you kind of think about it, you have this form kind of happening, and you can see you have this shadow shape here, and you're going to actually have the same kind of shape here, but it's wrapping towards the light, and it'll be a similar shape, but it's going to be more in the mid-tone. And she has a little highlight here, but it doesn't connect all the way to the chin. Let's see. I would definitely focus on softening a couple of edges in the next layer too. For example, along the hairline here, you're definitely going to want to create, some of those subtler wisps of shadow. Even if it means pushing back, don't carry it too far to the right, but pushing back into that shadow with a little bit of a semi-light shadow color. That's already made a difference there. And make sure that like this light area here is a little bit darker. So you can see that she sits more in like a mid-tone range right through there. The exception is maybe just a little bit of a light here, but I feel like it was just a little severe, and that'll help to soften the edge on the eyebrow hairs too. So you can have like a little bit of a gradient there. I went through and darkened mine quite a bit in my second pass, as you guys will see when I go in and repaint the eye socket. I ended up carrying more mid-tone and more shadow over my edge too. So just this is our opportunity in the second pass to make those adjustments and correct the drawing and things like that as well. I corrected quite a bit in the mouth on mine in terms of refining it to try and capture her shape a little more specifically. So edges like you have down here, right in this jawline, is too sharp. So you want to concentrate on looking at how soft that tone rolls down and create a half tone that you can go in and tile. Now, I know some of you are saying, when I applied it really thin, it looked kind of like a swampy color. Well, that can be an issue if you're applying it too thin, but so if you find that you need to retile a section, you can. Just because I apply it kind of thin in that area, I do that for more minor changes. But if you feel like, oh, I really need to add a tile of a dark here, then do it. Apply it a little bit more opaquely. And then you can kind of spread that out with a half tone, kind of rounding that form out. And you can see how much of a difference that has made with regards to that edge. She does have a sharper edge along the jawline here. And edges take a little bit of time to learn how to see. So one thing I always say with edges is to pick your focal point, and that's where you're going to have your greatest contrast and your sharpest edges. And for us, this is kind of easy. It's the eyes. In a portrait, usually it's the eyes that kind of pull our gaze. And we already have the sharpest contrast in the eyes. We have the highlight next to the pupil. Those are the blackest areas in the entire painting, for the most part. Areas I might not want the eye drawn to where contrast happens is here, along that jawline. But if you kind of look, there it goes from being a very soft edge, so we have a soft edge right through here. So that's soft. Actually, it carries down a little further soft, and it picks up maybe a little bit more sharp, a little more hard here, but then it goes soft again. So, and it's a subtle difference. And overall, I would say that edge should be softer to help it recede. But paying attention to where your hard and soft edges are, and you're designing your painting. You're not just copying a photo. So, you know, if your photograph has a sharp edge in an area that's bringing this a little distracting, a good example would be right here. That hard line that's kind of connecting, that's kind of a weird tangent. I left mine out. I actually kind of merged it and made it softer in my painting by choice. So those are things to keep in mind as you're moving through and designing your painting. Here we have a sharper edge right along that cast shadow, and then it gets softer as it moves up. Very soft at the root. So paying attention to edge quality in this second pass, it's your opportunity to make those adjustments. Your cast shadows should always have a sharper edge than your form shadows. So if you find that the bridge of the nose has too sharp of a shadow, then you need to create a little more of a soft transition. Now yours looks pretty good here as far as softness goes. Although I would work on maybe transitioning from this tone into the light tone. So you might take a little bit of a tone somewhere in between and just lightly scumble over the surface and soften it just a little bit. I did that in my nose, so you'll see how some of those transitions work. And I actually show a little bit of a hatching technique where you kind of crisscross. Let's see if I can find a brush that'll mimic that. Yeah, so I kind of, if I had like a hard edge, I'll do it over here, a hard edge here between two tones, and then I had a light tone, right? And maybe they were just a little too distinct. What I did was I took my brush and kind of turned it on its side, and I did strokes across the form between the tiles that I wanted to soften and let them kind of overlap. And you'll see that technique with an actual brush, so it'll make a little more sense. But it helps to kind of refine that edge a little bit further. So otherwise, I think you have a really nice start. I would develop the eyes a little bit more. Again, watch for those edges around the eyes. You do want maybe crisper edges on the top, but this line here at the bottom is probably a little bit sharp where the light comes across the inner rim. You can see on her it's a little lighter here, but then it starts to kind of disappear and get softer here. Same thing here. It actually gets it's lighter in this section, but not as bright as what we see. It just, if you compare, isolated that value there, let's go ahead and do that. Let's isolate that value. And let's compare it to the light value here. Big difference. So it looks light to our eyes because there's so much dark around it, but really it's not that bright of a value, and it's nowhere near the light that we get over on the inner corner of the eye. So make sure you pay attention to some of those nuances as well. And that goes for everyone, because it's really easy to take an area that's surrounded by dark values and you have a tiny little light spot. It can amplify how light that feels to our eyes. But in reality, when you isolate that value, it's not as bright. It's just a perception because of the contrast that surrounds it. Does that make sense? Okay. There's a few things in the mouth I'd like you to maybe address. I do feel like it got a little short. So I would work on, I think mostly on this right side, her left, our right. I would extend that a little bit further. And maybe just a touch on this side. Give her a little bit longer of a mouth, and that's going to feel a little bit more like her. And I wouldn't bring the upper lip higher, but you might try bringing this dark just a little bit lower to give her that fuller feeling in the upper lip. I think your bottom lip is plenty full enough and could use that volume in the upper lip just a touch. When you go in and refine the eyes, just make sure, right now this feels almost like too elliptical, I think. Try rounding, yeah, round out the bottom. Just take your whites of the eyes and just kind of carry them in just a touch here and there. I think your shape seems okay on this side, other than maybe making sure you round out that right side. And also the dark in her whites of the eyes goes quite a bit darker on that shadow side, so don't be afraid to push that contrast a little bit further too. All right, so if you have any questions, you know how to reach me by email or in the forum. You might consider going down into the neck as well and just softening that cast shadow edge a touch. All right, if you have follow-up questions, just reach out to me. Good job. Okay, Susan, I saw you're in here. Okay, so you said that there's areas where you were able to paint and other areas where you couldn't quite get to this week. I know some of you have deadlines for shows and all of that stuff too, so it's okay. Like, I just want you to take your time and get through, you know, each layer you have this week to kind of catch up, and also begin starting your second layer. There isn't going to be as much work after, you know, these 2 weeks, or these last 3 or 4 weeks have been really intensive work. And then for the rest of the class, we're going to kind of be gliding a little bit. It'll be nudging this color and, you know, refining that, real small amounts of changes. So I'd rather you take your time. So you haven't done the right eye, nose, or mouth. Okay, that was my feeling. I mean, obviously with the mouth, but sometimes it's hard to tell in other areas. Okay, so I think it's looking really good. It's going to make a huge difference when you get that mouth in. I noticed it in my painting especially. She felt so pale, and it was hard to kind of see where I had actually added a color until I got those lips in. So obviously focus on getting the other eye, the nose, and the lips in. Those are going to be your main color zones, and they're going to help to the portrait pop a little bit more. I am sensing maybe an overall kind of greenish tint, and I can't tell if that's just the photo being warm or if it's your painting in person. Yeah, she could be a little pale. What I'm thinking is that maybe in these zones here, like in the forehead, you could go in and push the halftone over a little bit further. She doesn't have those real strong highlights until we get over into the left section of the face. And it could be even that your highlight is too broad here. So maybe you'll go in and you can see it's more broken here. She has like there's a little highlight here and a highlight here, but it's broken up by this kind of pink tone. She has a little bit more light here. So maybe your values got too broad. The photo's too warm again. Okay, so that's fine. I won't comment too much on the coloration. I was going to say it feels a little more green than she feels, which is more of like a gray violet. But if your photo feels more cool, I mean your painting feels more cool in real life, then don't worry about that too much. So yeah, I would concentrate on getting more of those halftones. You can notice like there's more subtle areas like here in the upper lip, in the muzzle. She has lighter zones, but overall the value range in like the upper muzzle is kind of like that. And then above that we have kind of like the highlight area. And it's a subtle value difference, but when you look at, and that's like the highlight section on her face, but when you look at like the broader tones, they're a little bit darker. So like the average tone out here is a little bit darker. Let me try getting a better brush here. So I think that would help. So you thought the left side where the light falls off on the cheek is too dark. Do you mean her left or our left? Are you talking about like the shadow side of the face or the light side of the face? Yeah, you know, with regards to, you said you didn't want to change it until the lips get in. I would agree with you on that. Get the eye and the lips and the nose painted in. It's easy to lighten and darken here forward. So, and you know, when we're first doing our color pass, our first color pass, we're kind of establishing the value range. Very rarely do you ever get it right in the first pass, you know, and that's just something you kind of come to accept. You can get it really close, and you might not find that you need to make that many changes, but you know, you're just trying to get like ballpark color zones. That's one of the reasons why we do that little color study too, so we can see kind of big picture and stay focused on the big picture before we get into the little nuances. So I agree with you. Put in color in the lips, the nose, get the other eye blocked in with the nice shadow color here. And then you can kind of go through and see if this area might be too, yeah, it's probably just a little bit too dark at first. So what you might find yourself doing in this area in the second pass is carrying down, like maybe making a slightly cool violet tone that's a little closer in value to the pink, and it'll serve as a transition. You might find that some of this color is too bright and you need another transition, in that area. But those are kind of nuances that can be handled in the second pass. So what I'll probably have you do is concentrate on getting the eyes, nose, and lips done by next weekend. Hopefully that's doable for you, because I know you have that show you're painting for. And don't worry about the second color pass unless you find you have time and you want to move forward with that. But just concentrate on getting these done, and then you'll have the rest of the class to kind of refine, and we'll talk about it from there forward. I do feel like maybe this side even has a little bit too much dark. So it would be easier, once you have everything blocked in, to go in with these kind of peachy hues and scumble, more softness and light into the face. Like, you'll notice the nose sits in a different value range overall than the cheek, so those are things that are going to also help to balance out how pale she feels, especially when you really beef up these color zones and you get like more red in the nose, even though she has those highlights on the nose as well, it's going to help once you get more color into those areas. The lips are also a good area once you add. They're going to be in a slightly darker value than the rest of the face. And the lips, when someone has pale lips, it can make them feel kind of dead and, well, pale. But adding color to the lips makes such a difference. So especially once you get those nice dark, rich values in, I'm just doing it real loose, paint over, but it's going to make a difference big time. Yeah, it's okay, Susan. Don't stress. It's mostly just I want to be able to help you. And like I said, there is much less work to be done over the next few weeks than these first intensive passes. So just if you can only get the eye, I think the lips are going to be pretty crucial. So even before the nose, get the eye and the lips done or something to that effect, because it's going to help you see where the painting should be going, overall. And then we can be more specific about where maybe you should darken or lighten. I do feel in the forehead maybe that paleness had kind of taken over, so maybe looking at where you can add more of the pale peachy pinks, and kind of close in around that highlight just a touch. That way it's not so broad. And that will help the overall feeling. That's too dark there, but you get the idea. So creating a few more plain changes in that forehead before those intense highlights. And you do see me do that in that second color pass on the broad forms of the face. I started to bring in more pink and kind of close in around my highlights, which were kind of broad in the beginning too. So I would concentrate on that. Do you have any other specific questions? You have a nice likeness, so I think as you kind of pull it further along, just take your time and maintain your drawing. Just looking at it overall, I think those lips and then the eye is going to make a big difference. You might find yourself wanting to brighten up the whites of the eyes just a touch too. Yeah. I'll try to get that video out this in the coming week. Thank you guys for your patience. We had a little bit of an emergency, so I wasn't able to. It was a day we had actually planned to film, so it got kind of crazy and derailed my schedule this week. So I will try and get that video out on how to get a good photo and some different techniques too, because I don't want you all to think, oh, I have to go out and buy all this lighting equipment. And there's a couple of different ways you can different places you can take your painting and situations. I'm sure most of you can find a good place where you can consistently get good pictures of your painting. It takes a little creativity and experimentation, but it'll be good enough for the class. You know, the main key idea is to get good color, so that way I'm not telling you to change your colors. All right, so Susan, if you do get your features finished and you want to begin the second color pass, just reach out to me, send me a picture, and I'll give you an extra like little feedback through email on some areas that I think you could work on in your second color pass, if you get that far. If not, just get as far as you can by our next critique. You know, when I'm planning the course, it's really hard to gauge how much time it's going to take everyone to get through the stages, because I know how long it'll take me, and I try to keep it as concise and short as possible, because, you know, I know how long it takes to watch the videos, and it's not always the easiest thing to sit there and watch hours and hours and hours of someone else painting. And so I try to kind of abbreviate my process as much as possible, with also giving you guys as much of an accurate idea of what it takes to develop a painting to finish, which you don't always get to see in a demonstration, like a live demo. Artists we never usually have that much time to bring our demo to a finish. So that's the benefit of being able to do it this way. But even I'm trying to keep it like condensed, okay, 2-hour chunks or whatever that's more manageable. But usually when I'm working, I take as much time as needed, you know, so don't feel like if you're not keeping up that, you know, you don't have to feel bad about it. It's just part of it. And I'm, like I said, I'm trying to paint as fast as I can, but also give you guys quality. But when I'm taking time on my paintings, gosh, I'll put a painting away for like a month sometimes, and I won't even look at it. If I'm sick of staring at it, I'll just put it away, or if I'm not sure where it's going. I think the longest break I've ever taken with a painting was 2 years. It was the piece, and you know, it's funny because as soon as I brought it back out, I knew exactly what I wanted to change about it. And I finished it, put it in a show, and it sold. But I held on to that painting for 2 years. It moved around with me through different states. And I knew there was something strong about it, but I wasn't quite sure what it needed. And I just needed to kind of sit with it for a while. So sometimes that's just how paintings go. You know, we don't always get to just, you know, have a fast, quick painting. Some just take a longer period to develop, or you might even revisit the idea in a different scale down the line. I actually have a little painting I started, and I was trying to finish it for a show, and I just had too many things going on, and I wasn't able to. But I decided after, and I wasn't happy. I'm happy with the subject, I'm happy with my composition, but I'm not happy with the scale. It just didn't feel like it was doing justice to the subject. So what I decided was that I wasn't going to rush this painting for the show, and I decided to just withdraw my application from the show, and I'm going to do the painting larger because it just called for it. So you don't have to feel bad. It's just kind of part of the creative process, and it's a part that most people think, oh, maybe I'm the only one in the world who feels this way. But you're not. You know, we all go through this very similar experience. And that's one of the benefits to being in a class, is you realize, hey, I'm not the only one who feels this way. Like, I have so many unfinished paintings. I never can finish anything, you know. But that's not entirely, everybody has a ton of unfinished work. I guarantee it. I have paintings that I just abandoned flat out, like, it's a bad idea. I don't like it. You know, I lost steam for it. You know, if I spend too long on something, sometimes I lose interest in the subject. It doesn't sit with me anymore, you know. So it just kind of depends, you know. It's very different, you know. We spend so much time alone in our studio. You know, we're often our own worst critic. And sometimes I find that helpful. If you're feeling really stuck on a piece, you don't know where you're going with it, you don't want to quite give up on it, I suggest putting it in a closet or a cabinet for like a month. Don't even look at it in between. Just put it aside, work on something else, and then bring it back out. And you'll see it with fresh eyes, and you'll probably, most likely what will happen, you'll pull it out and go, hey, it's not as bad as I remember. You know, and that's because we get so hyper-focused on what we're doing, and, you know, we say everything that's wrong with it, and, you know, we don't see what's going good for it. And sometimes you just have to put it away, focus on some other projects, and then come back to it. and you can, you know, tackle it with fresh eyes, and sometimes you just see the problem like with a solution right away. So yeah, don't feel bad. I know, and I know with this class we're like, oh, we got to push through this portrait, but that's just because of the learning project learning process. And the idea too, I always tell my workshop students when I'm teaching like a physical workshop, is don't feel like you have to walk away with a perfect painting. If you learned, that's the point. So it's not about making a masterpiece, even though that's always what we want. It's about what you learn in the process. And if you walk away with something valuable, then that's, you know, it's going to take you further. And sometimes you have to just start a new piece and like kind of employ those concepts again and again and again, and then you'll just see your work improve over time. You know, I used to always feel so much pressure, especially if I took like a 10-week pose class with an artist. I'm like, oh, I only have 10 weeks to get this perfect, you know, and I never get to finish it. I mean, it just never happened. But I walked away with so much more to apply to future paintings that it almost didn't matter, you know. So just keep that in mind too. You don't have to feel bad. It's not about perfection. It's about, you know, applying these principles and absorbing as much as you can, and then carrying it into your future practice. Okay, so enough philosophizing. Let's go ahead and move forward. Beth, are you here? Yep, you're right there. So let's go ahead and get onto yours. And thank you, Beth. I'm glad you find me encouraging. I always try to be as a art teacher. I think we're all such sensitive people. You know, getting critiques is not easy. You have to be able to accept, you know, feedback, and that's a big learning process in itself. Although I will say I've had instructors that are not the greatest at giving critiques and some that are excellent. So, you know, I try to give you good feedback, but also be kind about it and encouraging. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about where you can go from here. If you have any specific questions, just go ahead and type them in the chat box. But I'm going to go ahead and just start taking some notes here. So once this first color pass is dry, what you're going to want to do is go over the large planes first. And I think mostly what I see is that some of these tiles need just a little bit of softening. One way to do that is to build more midtone. So for example, let's take the forehead here. And there's this pink here, but then it's next to this really, really bright color. And this bright tone kind of takes up a large block of space here. And so what I think you need to do is work on maybe finding a mid-tone. It looks like you almost have one here, but maybe if you used more of it and kind of bridge the gap a little bit, and also maybe find a value that's in between those two. So you have like this pink, and then you have kind of that value step. So maybe even taking the two colors on your palette and mixing them together to give you a nice transition tone that you can use in this midsection of the forehead. I realize she has a couple of small like highlights like here and here, and it kind of radiates here, and they're all kind of soft. But overall, remember, we want that form to roll dark to light. And I think it just hits the light a little hard right through here. So let's take let's do a little quick paint over for you. So if we took, let's see if we can find a color that's somewhat in between. Yeah, something like that. So, so if you take this kind of more of a pinkish mid-tone, maybe even took some of this color and carried it over. She does have that pink zone there. too, but maybe it just needs to be a little bit more nuanced, because it kind of mixes with that halftone. And also this value here is probably too light. We want something more in the halftone range. So my feeling is that maybe you could push some of this more shadowy side a little bit deeper. And maybe soften that transition where it comes over to the shadow edge. And that's going to help roll that form a little bit softer. So this color still appears bluer than in real life. Okay, that's all right. Don't worry about that. I actually think your colors are somewhat on the mark. Like I said, the kind of peachier tones, I went through and added those actually in my second layer because I felt like my first pass was probably a little too blue as well. So don't worry, that's very easy to do in that second pass. You'll see areas where it kind of picks up that kind of more orangey tone. It's not everywhere on her, but it does appear in certain areas. So same thing down here in the cheeks. One thing that I'm noticing is the form in your cheek here on the left side. It almost feels like there's like a puffiness to this spot. So what we want to do is make sure that you're kind of carving out the cheekbone a little bit more with a deeper kind of indentation. I might even grab some of this color here and kind of carve out that plane. She does have a little bit of light, but I think maybe yours got carried down too far, so it's making this area feel kind of like puffy. It's more in reality kind of through this section here. And then this part kind of merges out into that too. It's kind of a subtle transition. And she does have like that lighter pink that transitions up to into the upper cheekbone area. If you go into some of these areas, you can look for like plane changes, like where there's a slight separation for the ocular cavity. Adding some cool halftones there. And then starting to push some of these more gray values towards the bottom. And just work, I think it's mostly just starting to transition those tiles. You almost have that tiling just more obvious. So working on making some of these areas more subtle, like over in the right cheek, taking a skin tone and just scumbling it over the red a little bit at the top. It gets a little more kind of bluish gray through here. And then she has a little bit more of a pale peach right here. So if you'll find that with the scumbling, it's much easier to kind of create those subtle nuanced transitions. I know in mine I ended up pulling actually a little bit of a deeper red further out from my shadow, and I ended up repainting my shadow edge a little bit so that I could have, you know, that softer edge, that cheekbone kind of rolling into the dark on this side. So you might find yourself doing that, just reworking, you know, the edges of the shadow plane. With regards to the features, her eyes feel maybe just a little bit large. And I think you had written and said, I'm afraid I lost some of the drawing in the eyes. So let me give you another layer here with some drawing corrections that you can kind of focus on and when you go into that second pass. See if black shows up, and if not, I'll do it in white. But my feeling is that you're on the right track here, but right around here, this needs to come down. And that will be like that interior lid. So it's not a huge amount, but it will help to kind of close that space. Maybe even a little bit more. Just because of the shape of her eye. I would go maybe more straight across there before it curves down. And that will help to get a little bit more of her shape, as you can see there. And I think where your iris is just fine. So just kind of leave that where it sits. But this line could be more subtle on the bottom lid. And so instead of having it kind of come down in that V, just kind of connect and roll that form and maybe bring this up a little bit more, this shadow here. And that's going to lock in her likeness in her eye. And that it looks like that's where your other iris should be. It does feel like this space got a little tight. So I want you to give her brow just a little more lift in this last half. So just kind of bring that straight over. You can take this skin tone up, leave the crease where it is. So I think that's fine. Just open up that bridge here for the upper brow bone. That should make a big difference there for you. And then on this eye here, I think it's very similar. Maybe bringing this down by about that much. It's more a shape thing that this part, you know, needs to maybe trim a little bit more straight. And then this bottom lid, I think it might be a little too open, so just raise it up. Not at the outside edge. I think it's mostly like maybe in here, and maybe extend the tear duct form just a little bit. I'm just feeling out some of the shape here. Yeah, and this is like maybe too evenly round. She has the highest point here, so maybe that can drop a little quicker. And remember that usually whatever direction the eye is looking, that's going to be, wherever the iris is and the pupil, that's going to be the highest peak on the upper lid. So if someone's looking this way, it's going to be here. If someone's looking this way, it's going to be like that. Does that make sense? So just pay attention to that larger shape. Her iris might be a little big here. That could be what I'm sensing too. So you might try trimming that just a little bit. You have a beautiful color in the eye there though. I really like that kind of seafoam green that you captured. When I did that second pass on my eyes, I ended up introducing a lot more green. I painted them in too blue in the beginning. With the mouth, I think you're pretty close, but I do feel like this could extend over just a touch. And I actually feel like the mouth maybe drops a little bit too quickly. Maybe lift that corner and lift that corner. It's a subtle difference, but it'll help to capture her her lip shape a little bit more. I'm looking at the Philtrum, and maybe you could bring these peaks down just a touch. Maybe not so much on that outside edge, just right in here. Okay, so other than going through with your second pass with the large planes, when you get into the features, you can start to make some of these drawing adjustments. I would start with the eyes because those are really important, and then go through with the nose and the lips. I worry that the nose is maybe getting a touch wide here. Kind of, if you look at the overall shape, it's kind of like that. Like there's the ball of the nose and then the wing. Right, we can't really see that edge real obvious because it's a lost edge, so it could just be that maybe you need to lighten up this color to create a little bit more of a lost edge there. But my feeling is that maybe that could narrow just a little bit. I think your nostril is probably okay, but maybe make it just a touch shorter. I'll do that one with white. So maybe just bring that in a little bit, and that will help to lock in a little bit more of that narrow nose shape. Yes, Beth, I will email you the drawing changes, and then I'll do the one with the, so I'll email you something like this, and then I'll also give you the paint over version, because those are on separate layers. Do you have any questions? I think your color palette seems pretty good, other than, like I said, adding some of those peach tones and then concentrating on, you know, those large planes. If you wanted to go in and make drawing corrections to the eyes before you do the large planes, that's probably okay. Just try not to get too much into the detailing. Just make those drawing changes first, let it dry, then consider the next one as your kind of second pass. Alrighty, yeah, good work. If you have any other questions though, just let me know. All right, Susan. So yeah, you have a really nice start here. I think with your, it looks like you're pretty much done with your first color pass. So you can go in and start to develop your second color pass. I think your transitions in the forehead look pretty good, although I would suggest, and I can't tell if this is just the photo or if of your painting doing this, but this area feels a little blown out here, right through here. I'm sure you have it maybe a little more subtle in person, but if not, then I would definitely look at where you have some more of these halftones kind of in these areas around the highlight and indicate some of those in your painting. So I would maybe go in and break up some of those forms a little bit. You know, like I did in mine, I added more pink in some areas, so just add a little bit more modulation. And then notice that as the hairline goes back and that forehead recedes, it's taking on more mid-tone. So it's a little bit darker towards that top. So it should kind of gradate out very subtly from there. Because that forehead plane, remember the top plane of the forehead is a ball, so it's going to kind of be rounding away from the light source a little bit. Plus her hair creates a little bit of a grayish shadow there, so you might consider even adding a little bit more of that softness to that shadow. With the whites of the eyes, they feel a little bit light on, mostly on the left eye. I think what would help is to go in with your darker gray here and maybe just darken this back corner just a little bit. And then don't be afraid to pull in kind of around the corner a little more contrast to that lower lid. And I think that'll help quite a bit. With regards to the mouth, I think just having, I think you have a okay shape on the top, but I feel like this either got too wide or it's too high. It might be a little bit of both. Let me check here. So that corner of her kind of lines up with the eye there, middle of the pupil. So yours might be just a tad long. And you could, because you went out maybe more straight in this direction, you could have elongated it, but it actually drops down maybe just a little bit, which will give you that illusion of the lengthening. It's a subtle difference, but I think it'll lock in her likeness a little bit better. So you might try moving that down. The right corner seems pretty good. I wouldn't make that longer. What I would watch out for though is taking areas like this and having that real hard line right in here. So you might take more of this gray tone and find a break in that edge. There's always lost and found edges on the lips, and you typically find them in this area. She does have that linear kind of edge, but I would soften it as it recedes. And she also has a double line, so there's a dark accent here. So you might even try emphasizing that and then carrying a little bit of light underneath it. And that'll add some more definition to those planes. In this nostril here on the right, it feels like it got maybe a little bit large. So I would take your shadow color and start to maybe just look at where you could define a little bit more of the shape. There are lost edges in that shadow, but you'll see me go through and define my nostril a little bit more too. It could also be that maybe your shadow shape needs to be a little bit more defined in that edge too, because yours got maybe a little lost, and that could help to kind of merge that nostril into that shadow a little bit more, so we don't focus on the nostril so much, but we focus on the form of the ball of the nose. Of course, this will have a slightly soft edge, but I'm just leaving it defined so you can see a little better. And where you bring this dark shadow in for the cast shadow, maybe just use that same tone to trim and fade that nostril within that shadow, the wing of the nostril there. When it comes to edges along here, like this one here, I know I mentioned this in a few other critiques, but you want to make sure you have a little bit more of that softness to the halftone, so maybe tiling in that gray a little bit. And also she feels maybe a little too round. You can see that there's this angle on hers. It's kind of rounded, but it kind of takes on a little more angularity there. So I'm thinking maybe drop that down just a little bit. I think you have this part in the right spot. So I think it's just more dropping that shape in pulling the light down. So your shadow maybe will be down in here. And that will help this length here. When you get into the lips again, don't be afraid to push these values a little bit darker on that shadow side. You're definitely going to want to go in and define. She has this underplane here for the lip, right through here. It's kind of this shadow shape. There's little reflected lights within that, but overall, I think if you worked on pushing that shadow shape a little bit darker, of course it's going to be more of a red, and she has a little more of that in here. I'm just drawing in where it is. You're going to give more dimension to that upper lip. It's a little bit more of a light red on this side. And it could be that you need to maybe lighten up a little bit in here too. But that's going to help give more structure to the lips. Her chin might need to come, that shadow edge might need to come down just a little bit. Let me sketch in where that is. Yeah, I think the rest of it's pretty good. So maybe just once you drop the jawline here, you'll end up pushing that down just a tiny bit, and it'll open up the light mass on her chin quite a bit. All right, so that looks pretty good though. I think if you see any other transitions, I think maybe just working on some of your values transitioning in here and then adding more detail like you see me do in my painting, get more specific with where the highlights are and where you have a little more information in the eyes, then your painting's going to develop pretty on point. So if you have any follow-up questions, just let me know. Good work. All right. Now, David, are you here, David? Now, I know you kind of had a few things that have kind of caused you to fall behind, and you redid your color study, but I wanted to just review this because you had emailed me, but I got sidetracked with everything going on this week. So I wanted to go over your underpainting really quick with you. Just a couple of drawing things I wanted to address. Mostly here in the eyes. It looks like her eyes are looking more at us. And so I think what would help is to push almost where you have this pupil. That's where the side of the iris should be. So the pupil will be there. Same thing with this one. Almost push it over into that corner a little bit more. And then instead of having the peak kind of here in the upper lid, push this part up a little higher so that that peak sits above. So you have almost like this arc instead of something more even like that. Same goes on this side. Just open up that arc a little bit and flatten out this side, and that will help. And then of course your upper lid is going to follow that same form. You almost have that shape there, though I feel like this part cuts down too quickly, so you might open that up just a little bit more before it trims off. And then same goes here. I would narrow her nose a little bit and bring in that nostril more like right here. And don't be afraid to kind of knock this section into kind of more of a solid shadow shape. You almost don't need any light in that nostril because it'll all be defined with more dark. So I would just treat this as one, kind of solid shadow mass. In the beginning. And later on you can go in and define a little bit more in that, that shadow shape where the nostril is and then some of those details. And then finally with the lips, let me get back to my ink pen. I think this corner can just drop a little bit. And make sure where you have this peak that it's kind of more centered to the right here. I think where you have this corner feels pretty good. So I think it's just this corner needs to come down. She might be a little wide across the cheekbone here. So I would bring that in just a little bit. And I can sense where you have the other side here. That feels pretty good with regards to that hair shape as it opens up. The only other thing with the eyes, and this could be why you ended up pushing this down, was open up her eyebrow here just a little bit at the end. You don't need to raise where it sits in the beginning, but just here at the end, bring that peak up and open up this space. The other eyebrow feels just fine, so just make sure you open up that space a little bit on the right side. Okay, if you have any follow-up questions, just let me know. Okay, Linda, are you in here still, Linda? How's everyone doing? You guys holding up okay? I know I needed a little bit of tea this morning. It's been a long week. If you're here, Linda, I thought I saw you up here earlier. But if you had to step away, that's okay. So the only thing I wanted to ask you, if you are in here, is if your painting feels a little warm in this picture, or if this feels like your painting feels in real life. She looks a little bit maybe on the yellow side, and that's why I wanted to ask, because I can always take some of that out. If it's just, oh, there you are. So is your painting as warm as it appears in this picture, or should I take it down just a little bit, take out some of the yellow? Oh, it is that warm. Okay, okay. So I'll just reset that. Okay. So I think in your second color pass, you have a nice first pass here. The drawing feels nice and solid. I would work on introducing a few cooler tones to the skin, like especially in like the cool pinks. Opportunities for that exist in the lips, cheeks, oh, excuse me, and even up in the forehead. Like for example, in this area here. So you can start to move away from some of the kind of yellow-green and introduce a little bit more pink to balance it out. Maybe like through this zone, just add a little bit, if you take your skin tone that you already have and just introduce a little bit of alizarin crimson, that should do it. That should be plenty to help. And then you can just scumble that into a couple of areas. I would introduce some of that maybe in the cheeks, but maybe a little bit more kind of a rosy pink on this side too. It feels a little bit orange, so maybe try that alizarin with a little bit of blue to give it a little bit more of a kind of slight purple tint, especially as it moves towards that shadow edge where it deepens. It almost becomes a little bit of a violet, and you can see how just introducing a few of those pinks has already cooled off the overall feeling. In her lips, I think you could pump up the saturation a little bit on that bottom lip and kind of get more in that berry pink tone. I think your forms look pretty good, but you might want to put in that darker shadow shape for the lip too and start to build some of the contrast in there. And it looks like some of the colors are kind of put in maybe a little bit thin. So you might want to apply a little bit thicker paint. Yeah, not glazes. I feel like it almost feels like some of your underpainting are glazes, but you want to apply more opaque paint with your first color pass. So areas like in here where it feels a little, the paint feels a little thin, like in these transitions, and even in the lights, I think you could add a little bit more opaque, thicker paint. So start to build up the paint in the lights. The areas where you want to apply more thin, transparent colors are in the shadows, but when you get into the lights, you want to build up your paint layers a little bit thicker. So yeah, you'll be doing maybe a little bit more of an opaque application. They're technically scumbles, but since your paint is kind of thin in some of these areas, you might tile it in a little bit thicker and work on building up some of that texture in the lights. I think around the highlight, you could also go in with a couple of softer, like bright pinks. The yellow, it is there, but when it mixes with the pink or intermingles when they're kind of side by side, it can help something feel like it shimmers a little bit. So you might consider, introducing some of that, and then a little more red in the nose. Just focus on those color zones of the face because it's going to bring a little bit more life to the painting. And then as you're going along, make sure that you are keeping in mind some of the edges. So like, for example, along this edge here, where the hair meets the face, you might even do a thin tile of like a gray halftone, and then re-wet the hair just a little bit along that edge so that you can kind of blend them and create a softer transition. You can see the difference there, how it helps that cheek kind of recede. Well, you can use the oleo gel to oil out. So whenever I go back in with a second paint layer, I always oil out the area I'm going to paint with the oleo gel. But you're not leaving a lot on there. You're really just applying just the thinnest amount. So you could even apply it and then take a clean dry brush and wipe off, or you can take a rag and wipe off any of the extra. It should just be very, very thin film left on the surface. If it's too much on there, then every time you apply paint, it's just going to slide around on you and it'll look more like a glaze. And that could be what happened in this layer. So just make sure that you're just applying very, very small amounts. One technique that works great is to use latex makeup sponges. I didn't have any, so I just used brushes. But you can use those to wipe off the excess. And they don't leave lint or any residue behind on your painting. So they can work really nicely too. Just those little foam squares you use for applying foundation, they work really nicely for that. So yeah, she feels maybe still a little monochromatic. So I think once you introduce some of these pinks and enhance those color zones, she's going to start to take on a little bit more life. And then you can start to take some of these lighter areas and enhance some of the highlights. Just start pushing it maybe slightly more pink. Did you send, no, you didn't send me a picture of your palette. If you want to next week, send me a picture of your color palette, your color chart. And I could kind of help you adjust some of the mixtures if you're finding them too yellow. As you continue to build up some of those secondary forms in that second pass, look for areas where you can introduce that transition gray, like for example right there on the side plane of the nose, and pushing maybe a little bit more deep values over here. The more midtones you have, you know, more of those darker midtones you have in your painting, the more impact those highlights are going to take. So just by pushing those areas down, we're giving it more of that form. Like for example up here in the forehead, even carrying that midtone over just a little further helps make that highlight glow just a little bit more. Okay, so do you have any questions? Oh, and what I suggested here along the edge of the cheek, I would also repeat along the edge of the neck. So that same technique down here where you kind of tile in that half tone that's going to help transition and softer edges. So you said when you were painting, it did not seem so transparent, but it showed up so in the photo. Okay, yeah, sometimes they can be drying more transparent too, because if you applied the paint somewhat thin, it dries a little bit more, slightly more transparent than it is when it's opaque. The mixture for the gray that I ended up using quite a bit was, let me think back. It was my burnt sienna with ultramarine blue, but the ultramarine blue was dominant. So it was mostly ultramarine blue, a touch of burnt sienna to neutralize the blue, and a little bit of white, I believe. And if that is too chromatic or too rich, just add a touch more burnt sienna and maybe a touch of yellow ochre, but be careful about that yellow ochre because you already have so much green in there. Or you could even throw in just a little bit of alizarin if the burnt sienna is too much. But that should be pretty close to the gray that I'm using. Oh, you're very welcome, Beth. I wanted to give everyone we weren't planning on having this critique this week, but I felt like everyone was trying to play catch up, and I know that this first layer takes a really long time. It's a lot of work, so thank you guys for being patient with me while I kind of shuffled around the class and everything for our critiques, because I probably underestimated how much time it would take everyone to get these done, even though I kind of grouped them into 2-week sessions so you'd have a little more time. These things just happen, and life happens, as we all know. So yeah, do you have any other questions, Linda? Does anyone have any other questions? As I said at the beginning, there is a new video up that you guys can watch. It's where I go in and repaint the eyes, the second pass on the eyes. Before you watch, if you haven't watched the one before that, for the second pass on the large planes, do that one first, and then follow with the eyes. And then by tonight, I'll have the nose and the lips second pass up. So, okay, so Linda, your question is the mixture for the pink. So what I like to use for the lips is I took a little bit of my burnt sienna with a lot more of my alizarin crimson, and I mixed those two together with a touch of blue, just a tiny bit of blue. So it kind of makes this deep purple burgundy, and then I mixed a value string with that with white. And that's what I used for the lips. And then sometimes I added like an extra little cadmium here and there. I talk about that in the lips painting video. All right, everyone. So if you guys have questions as you move through this next layer, just post them in the forum and I'll try to answer as quickly as I can. And as you move into your second pass, just remember to oil out and take your time. Get as far as you can by next week, even if it's just the large planes. If that's as much as you can get done, that's okay. You know, make sure you at least have all of your first color pass done before you move on to a second color pass. So we kind of move it through this in stages. You have the first color pass, make sure that's complete before you move into that second color pass. You don't want to go in and do a second color layer on the large planes before you've finished the first pass on the features. All right, so yeah. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in. I'm glad you guys are enjoying the class, and I look forward to seeing your work next week. All right, enjoy the week's lesson. Bye, guys.